I woke up that Tuesday morning to the sound of someone banging on my front door like they were trying to break it down. And when I opened it, there stood Patricia Henderson with her arms crossed, and the kind of expression that told me my peaceful morning was about to turn into a nightmare. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "we need to discuss the industrial noise pollution you are creating in this neighborhood." I rubbed my eyes, still groggy. It was barely 7 in the morning. "I'm sorry, what?" Patricia was the president of our HOA in Asheville, North Carolina, and she had made it her personal mission to make everyone's life miserable since she took over the position 3 years ago. She was in her late 40s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, and had the kind of blonde bob haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." "That generator of yours," she continued, pulling out her phone and showing me what looked like a decibel reading app. "It exceeds our noise ordinance by 15 decibels. That's completely unacceptable." I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying. My generator was sitting in my backyard, running quietly as it had been for the past 6 months since I installed it. It was a newer model, specifically designed to be quiet, and I had positioned it as far from my neighbors as possible. "Patricia, that generator barely makes any noise. It's one of the quietest models available. According to our HOA bylaws, Section 12, Subsection 4, any mechanical equipment that produces noise above 50 decibels is prohibited between the hours of 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. Your generator has been running at 65 decibels for the past week straight. That's not possible. The manufacturer specs say it runs at 48 decibels at full load." She shoved a paper into my hands. "This is your official warning. You have 48 hours to remove the generator or face daily fines of $200. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her pumps clicking against the pavement. I stood there in my doorway, holding the notice and feeling my blood pressure rising. The generator wasn't just some luxury item. My wife, Rebecca Rutherford, had been diagnosed with a severe respiratory condition 2 years ago. We had medical equipment in our home that needed consistent power. The nebulizer, the oxygen concentrator, her CPAP machine for sleeping, all of it required electricity 24/7. We had gotten the generator after a storm last winter knocked out power for 3 days, and Rebecca ended up in the emergency room because her oxygen concentrator stopped working. I walked back inside and found Rebecca in the living room, already awake and sitting in her favorite chair with the oxygen concentrator humming quietly beside her. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice slightly strained as it always was in the mornings before her first breathing treatment. "Patricia Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The HOA wants us to get rid of the generator." Rebecca's eyes widened. "They what?" "Frank, that generator is the only reason I can breathe safely in this house." "I know, honey. I'm going to handle this." I spent the next hour on the phone with the HOA management office, trying to explain the situation to anyone who would listen. The woman who answered, a young secretary named Amy, seemed sympathetic, but insisted that all decisions had to go through Patricia and the HOA board. "Mr. Brennan, I understand your concerns, but Mrs. Henderson is very particular about following the rules. Have you tried submitting a formal appeal?" "An appeal for what?" "For the right to keep my wife alive." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end. "I'll make a note in your file." "The board meets next Thursday. You can present your case then." "Next Thursday? That's 9 days away. I have 48 hours according to this notice." "I'm sorry, sir. That's the best I can do." I hung up and immediately started researching disability rights and HOA regulations. North Carolina law had provisions for reasonable accommodations for medical equipment, and I was certain that a generator powering life-sustaining equipment would fall under that category. I drafted an email to the HOA board explaining Rebecca's condition in detail, attaching her medical documentation, and citing the relevant state laws regarding disability accommodations. The response came 2 hours later. It was from Patricia. "Mr. Brennan, while we sympathize with your wife's condition, personal medical situations do not exempt residents from HOA regulations. The generator must be removed within the timeline specified. If you need alternative arrangements, we suggest exploring battery backup systems or relocating to a home better suited to your needs. Regards, Patricia Henderson, HOA President." I read the email 3 times, each time feeling angrier. The casual suggestion that we should just move, as if that were a simple solution, as if we hadn't put our entire savings into buying this house just 4 years ago, made my hands shake. "Frank," Rebecca called from the other room, "is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just dealing with some paperwork." That afternoon, I called a lawyer. His name was Martin Green, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Asheville, and he agreed to see me the next morning. I barely slept that night. The generator hummed outside, a sound I'd grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore. But now, knowing that Patricia was threatening to take it away, every mechanical rumble felt precious and precarious. The next morning, I met with Martin Green in his office on Patton Avenue. He was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he had seen too many absurd HOA cases. "Let me get this straight," he said after I explained everything. "Your wife has a documented medical condition requiring 24-hour access to electrical medical equipment, and the HOA wants to remove your backup generator." "That's correct." He leaned back in his chair. "North Carolina has very clear laws about this. Under the Fair Housing Act, HOAs are required to provide reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. A backup generator for medical equipment is about as reasonable as it gets. So what do? First, we send them a formal demand letter citing federal and state law. We'll include your wife's medical documentation and a statement from her doctor. If they ignore it or proceed with enforcement action, we file an injunction and potentially a lawsuit for disability discrimination. How long will that take? The demand letter we can send today. If they're smart, they'll back down immediately. If not, we can have an emergency injunction filed within 72 hours. I felt a weight lift slightly off my shoulders. Let's do it. Martin drafted the letter while I waited, and we sent it via email and certified mail to the HOA board that afternoon. The letter was thorough and professional, outlining every legal reason why the HOA had to accommodate our generator. It referenced the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and specific North Carolina statutes regarding disability accommodations. I went home feeling cautiously optimistic. Surely, when faced with clear legal precedent, Patricia would have to back down. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a sound I didn't immediately recognize. It was quiet, unnaturally quiet. I sat up in bed and realized what was missing: the gentle hum of the generator. I ran outside in my pajamas. The generator was gone. In its place was a yellow notice staked into the ground that read, "Equipment removed for HOA violation. Contact board for retrieval information. Storage fees apply." I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull out my phone. I called Martin Green immediately, not caring that it was 6 in the morning. "They took it," I said when he answered, my voice breaking. They just came and took the generator. What? When? Sometime during the night. It's gone, Martin. My wife's medical equipment. Listen to me very carefully, Frank. Is your wife okay right now? I ran back inside. Rebecca was still asleep, the oxygen concentrator running on house power. She's okay for now, but if we lose electricity, I'm filing for an emergency injunction right now. This is theft of medical equipment. I'm also calling the police. What they did is potentially criminal. The police? Frank, they stole property that's necessary for someone's medical care. That's not just an HOA violation dispute anymore. Call 911 and report the theft. I'll meet you at your house in 20 minutes. I called 911 with trembling hands. The dispatcher seemed confused at first when I tried to explain that the HOA had stolen my generator, but when I mentioned that it powered my wife's medical equipment, her tone changed immediately. Sir, is your wife in immediate medical danger? Not right now, but she will be if we lose power. That generator is our backup system. I'm sending officers to your location now. 2 Asheville police officers arrived within 15 minutes. They were professional and took my statement seriously. I showed them the HOA notice, explained Rebecca's medical condition, and provided documentation of the generator's installation and purpose. The older officer, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, frowned as he looked at the notice. Did they provide any warning before removing this? They gave me a 48-hour notice 2 days ago, but my lawyer sent them a demand letter yesterday explaining that this is medical equipment protected under federal disability law. And they took it anyway, apparently. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with his partner. This is complicated because it involves an HOA, but the fact that it's medical equipment changes things. We're going to need to speak with whoever authorized this removal. Martin Green arrived while the officers were still taking notes. He introduced himself and provided them with copies of all the legal correspondence we had sent to the HOA. Officers, Martin said, what we have here is potentially several crimes. Theft, obviously, but also reckless endangerment, given that this equipment is necessary for Mrs. Brennan's medical care, and possibly criminal trespass, depending on how they access the property to remove it. The younger officer looked uncomfortable. We'll need to investigate further. Mr. Brennan, do you have security cameras? I did. I had installed them 6 months ago, ironically at Patricia Henderson's suggestion during an HOA meeting about neighborhood security. I pulled up the footage on my phone and played it for the officers. The video was clear. At 2:30 in the morning, a pickup truck had pulled into my driveway. 3 men got out and under Patricia Henderson's supervision, they disconnected my generator, loaded it onto the truck and drove away. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes. Rodriguez watched the footage twice. That's Patricia Henderson, president of our HOA. He shook his head. I've dealt with her before. She called in a complaint about someone's lawn gnomes last month, said they were visual pollution. He turned to his partner. We need to bring her in for questioning. Wait, I said. Can you do that? Mr. Brennan, she's on video taking your property without permission in the middle of the night. The fact that she's HOA president doesn't give her the right to do that. At minimum, it's theft. Given the circumstances with your wife's medical equipment, it could be more serious. Martin looked satisfied. Officers, I'd also like to know where they've taken the generator. My client needs it returned immediately. We'll find out, Rodriguez assured us. In the meantime, Mr. Brennan, is there anything you can do to ensure your wife's medical equipment stays operational? As long as we have house power, she's fine. It's if the power goes out that we have a problem. Let's hope Duke Energy has a quiet week then, Rodriguez said grimly. We'll be in touch. After the police left, Martin and I sat at my kitchen table going over our options. This actually works in our favor legally, Martin explained. They've escalated this beyond a simple HOA dispute. The police involvement means there's a criminal investigation now. That puts a lot of pressure on the HOA board. But I need the generator back now, not after a court case. I'm filing the emergency injunction this morning. We'll request immediate return of the generator and a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any further action against you. Given what they did, I think we'll get it. Rebecca came into the kitchen, moving slowly and trailing her portable oxygen tank behind her. "Frank, what's going on? Why are there police cars outside?" I helped her sit down and explained everything. By the time I finished, she was crying. "They took the generator." "Frank, what if the power goes out? What if something happens?" "It's not going to," I said, taking her hand. "Martin's getting a court order to force them to return it today, and the police are investigating. This is going to be okay." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Martin left to file the injunction. I spent the next few hours constantly checking the weather forecast, terrified of any storm that might knock out power. I also called Rebecca's doctor, Dr. Sarah Morrison, and explained the situation. "They did what?" Dr. Morrison was furious. "Mr. Brennan, that generator isn't a convenience. It's a critical component of your wife's care plan. Without it as a backup, she's at serious risk. Can you provide a letter stating that, something we can use in court?" "I'll do better than that. I'm writing a letter to the HOA board myself, and I'm copying the state medical board. What they did is unconscionable." Around noon, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Brennan, this is Richard Kowalski. I'm on the HOA board. I just heard about what happened with your generator, and I want you to know that not all of us agreed with Patricia's decision." "You're telling me this now, after she already took it?" "I didn't know she was going to do it. She called an emergency board vote last night via email. Said you were in violation and that we needed to act immediately before you could get a lawyer involved. She pushed the vote through before most of us even read the details. And you voted yes." There was a long pause. "I didn't vote at all. I was asleep. When I woke up this morning and saw what happened, I immediately tried to call an emergency meeting to reverse it, but Patricia says we can't revisit a decision without waiting 30 days per our bylaws. That's convenient for her. Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. Patricia has been running this HOA like her own personal fiefdom for years. Most of us are just trying to keep the neighborhood maintained, but she takes everything to extremes. Last year, she tried to fine someone for having the wrong shade of white on their mailbox. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that if you sue the HOA, I'll testify on your behalf. What she did is wrong, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Several of us are planning to call for a vote to remove her as president." "Where's my generator, Richard?" "It's in a storage unit on Tunnel Road. Patricia rented it yesterday morning. She has the only key." I thanked him and immediately called Martin with the information. He said it would help with the injunction. By 3 that afternoon, we were in front of Judge Elizabeth Carver in Buncombe County Court. It was an emergency hearing, and Patricia Henderson looked furious that she had been summoned on such short notice. She had brought the HOA's lawyer, a nervous-looking young man named Timothy Chen, who kept checking his phone. Martin presented our case efficiently. He showed the judge Rebecca's medical documentation, Dr. Morrison's letter, the police report about the theft, and the security camera footage of Patricia removing the generator. Judge Carver watched the footage with an expression that grew increasingly stern. When it finished, she turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm trying to understand your reasoning here. You were informed that this generator was necessary for medical equipment. Patricia stood up, smoothing her skirt. Your Honor, the HOA has rules that all residents must follow. Mr. Brennan's generator was in violation of our noise ordinance. We gave him proper notice. Were you aware that his wife requires medical equipment that needs reliable power? I was informed of that claim, yes. However, we have many residents with various needs, and we cannot make exceptions to our rules based on individual circumstances. That would set a dangerous precedent. Judge Carver looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Henderson, are you familiar with the Fair Housing Act? I am, Your Honor, but then you should know that federal law requires you to provide reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. A backup generator for life-sustaining medical equipment is not just reasonable, it's potentially necessary. Timothy Chen, the HOA's lawyer, stood up suddenly. Your Honor, if I may, I was not consulted before the generator was removed. I would have strongly advised against it had I known the circumstances. Patricia's face flushed red. Timothy, sit down. Mrs. Henderson. He's the lawyer, not you, Judge Carver said sharply. She looked at the documents in front of her. I'm granting the injunction. The generator is to be returned to Mr. Brennan's property immediately today and reconnected at the HOA's expense. The HOA is prohibited from taking any enforcement action regarding the generator. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Brennan's legal fees to date and issuing a temporary restraining order against Mrs. Henderson specifically. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Patricia protested. What's outrageous, Mrs. Henderson, is removing medical equipment in the middle of the night. You're lucky I'm not holding you in contempt right now. If you interfere with this order in any way, you will face criminal charges. Do you understand? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Yes, Your Honor. Good, Mr. Chen, I expect compliance within 3 hours. This hearing is adjourned. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. Martin clapped me on the shoulder. That went well. What happens now? They have to return the generator and pay our legal fees. And if Patricia tries anything else, she'll be arrested. We left the courthouse. Patricia stormed past us without making eye contact, her face still red with anger. Timothy Chen approached us apologetically. Mr. Brennan, I am so sorry about this. I had no idea she was going to take that action. I'll personally ensure the generator is returned this afternoon. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I'm also resigning as the HOA's counsel. I can't represent an organization that does things like this. True to his word, the generator was back in my yard by 5 that afternoon. The same 3 men who had taken it reinstalled it, and a technician came to verify it was working properly. I stood there watching, afraid to believe it was really over. Rebecca came outside, moving carefully with her oxygen tank. She took my hand and squeezed it. Is it really back? It's really back. She started crying, and so did I, but the story didn't end there. A week later, I got a call from Officer Rodriguez. Mr. Brennan, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We're filing charges against Patricia Henderson for theft and criminal trespass. The DA is also considering reckless endangerment charges given your wife's medical condition. Seriously. What she did was illegal, regardless of her HOA position. She can't just take people's property in the middle of the night. The video evidence is clear, and we have several witnesses who say she knew about your wife's medical needs before she removed the generator. What happens next? She'll be arraigned next week. The DA will determine the exact charges, but I wanted you to know that we're taking this seriously. Patricia Henderson was arrested 2 days later. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly our quiet neighborhood dispute was headline news. HOA president arrested for seizing medical equipment, read the Asheville Citizen-Times. The story spread to regional news outlets and then to national news. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. I declined most of them, but I did agree to talk to a local reporter named Jennifer Walsh, who had covered HOA disputes before. "This isn't the first time Patricia Henderson has gone too far," Jennifer told me when we met for coffee at a shop on Haywood Road. "I've been tracking complaints about her for 2 years. Last year, she tried to foreclose on an elderly resident because their lawn had dandelions. Before that, she fined a family $5,000 because their kids left toys in the front yard. Why does she keep getting away with it? Because most people don't fight back. They either pay the fines or move. You're the first person to really stand up to her, and now that there are criminal charges, other people are coming forward with their own stories." "What kind of stories?" "Harassment, intimidation, selective enforcement of rules. One woman says Patricia targeted her because she didn't vote for her in the last HOA election. I'm writing a longer piece about the broader issue of HOA overreach, and your case is going to be the centerpiece." The article came out the following Sunday. It was damning. Jennifer had interviewed 15 different residents with complaints about Patricia. She had documented patterns of harassment and abuse of power going back years. She had also discovered that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including the storage unit where she kept my generator. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Richard Kowalski was appointed interim president. He called me personally to apologize. "Frank, on behalf of the entire board, I am so sorry for what you and Rebecca went through. We've been reviewing all of Patricia's actions over the past 3 years, and we're finding a lot of problems. We're bringing in an independent auditor to review the finances, and we're rewriting the bylaws to prevent this from happening again." "I appreciate that, Richard. We'd also like to formally approve your generator as a permanent accommodation. No more questions, no more disputes. You have our full support." Patricia's criminal case moved forward. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was acting in her capacity as HOA president and therefore had authority to enforce community rules. The DA shut that down quickly. Mrs. Henderson's position as HOA president doesn't give her the right to steal property or endanger someone's health, the DA said during a hearing I attended. "If anything, her position of authority makes her actions more egregious, not less." Patricia eventually took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft and reckless endangerment. She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to me for the legal fees, the cost of reinstalling the generator, and additional damages related to the emotional distress she caused Rebecca. The judge who sentenced her was tough. "Mrs. Henderson, you abused your position of authority to harass and endanger one of your neighbors. You showed a complete disregard for their well-being and for the law. You're fortunate that Mrs. Rutherford didn't suffer a medical emergency as a result of your actions, because if she had, you would be facing much more serious charges." Patricia stood there silently, her usual confidence completely gone. She looked older somehow, diminished. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The HOA drama continued even after Patricia was removed. The independent audit discovered that she had misappropriated over $30,000 in HOA funds over 3 years. She had charged personal meals, clothing purchases, and even a weekend trip to Charleston to the HOA credit card. The board filed a civil lawsuit against her to recover the funds, and her homeowner's insurance eventually settled. Richard Kowalski turned out to be a good HOA president. He focused on actual community needs rather than petty rule enforcement. He organized neighborhood cleanups, negotiated a better landscaping contract, and established clear guidelines for what violations actually warranted fines versus friendly reminders. He also pushed through a new bylaw specifically protecting medical equipment and reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. It was named Rebecca's Rule in honor of my wife, which made her cry when she found out. Life slowly returned to normal. Rebecca's health remained stable. The generator hummed quietly in our backyard, no longer a source of stress, but a quiet assurance of safety. The oxygen concentrator ran day and night. The nebulizer treatments happened on schedule, and we no longer lay awake worrying about what would happen if the power went out. I did several interviews over the following months about HOA reform. The story had struck a nerve nationally, and I heard from dozens of people dealing with similar issues in their own communities. Some reached out for advice, others just wanted to share their experiences. I became an accidental advocate for HOA reform, testifying before the North Carolina State Legislature about the need for stronger protections against HOA overreach. A bill was eventually introduced, though it hadn't passed yet as of the time I'm telling this story. It would require HOAs to provide reasonable accommodations for medical equipment, establish clearer procedures for appeals and disputes, and impose stricter oversight on HOA finances. I like to think that our nightmare had at least led to something positive. Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had first covered our story, went on to win a state journalism award for her series on HOA abuses. She told me it was the most impactful story she had ever worked on. People don't realize how much power these organizations have over their lives until something goes wrong, she said when we met for coffee to celebrate her award. Your willingness to fight back and go public made it possible for others to speak up too. I didn't really have a choice, I said. It was my wife's health on the line. A lot of people would have just given up and moved. You didn't. 6 months after the whole ordeal began, Rebecca and I were sitting on our back porch on a warm evening in June. The generator hummed softly in the background, barely audible over the crickets and the sound of kids playing down the street. Rebecca was doing well. Her breathing treatments were working, and she had even been able to reduce her oxygen usage during the day. Can you believe it's been 6 months? She asked, holding my hand. Feels like a lifetime ago and also like yesterday, I said. You regret how it all played out. What do you mean? With Patricia, with the criminal charges, everything that happened to her. I know it got pretty ugly. I thought about it. I don't regret standing up for us. She made choices that put you in danger and she had to face consequences for that. But I don't take any pleasure in her suffering if that's what you're asking. You're a better person than I am then. I'm still pretty mad at her. I laughed. I'm still pretty mad too. But anger is exhausting. I'd rather focus on the fact that we're okay, that we're safe, and that maybe we helped make things better for other people. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance. The neighborhood was peaceful. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalk. Someone was grilling burgers a few houses down. It was the kind of ordinary evening that felt extraordinary after everything we had been through. Richard Kowalski walked by with his dog and waved. Evening, Frank, Rebecca. Evening, Richard. Generator running well, like a charm. Good to hear. He continued on his walk, and I was struck by how different the neighborhood felt now. Less tense, more friendly. It turned out that a lot of people had been walking on eggshells around Patricia, afraid of drawing her attention. With her gone, people seemed more relaxed, more willing to actually be neighbors instead of just residents in compliance with the rules. The following week, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Patricia Henderson. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Dear Frank and Rebecca," it read. "I am writing to apologize for my actions regarding your generator. I have spent the past 6 months in therapy and in reflection about my behavior, and I realize now that I was wrong. I became so focused on enforcing rules that I lost sight of why those rules exist in the first place. To help people live better lives, not to make them harder. I put my own need for control above your very real medical needs, and that was inexcusable. I understand if you cannot forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am genuinely sorry for the pain and fear I caused you both. I hope Rebecca is doing well. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson." I showed the letter to Rebecca. She read it twice, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think she's sorry she got caught and punished," Rebecca said, "but maybe that's cynical of me. Maybe people can change. Should I respond? Do you want to?" I thought about it. "I don't know." Part of me wants to write back and tell her exactly how terrifying it was to wake up and find the generator gone, knowing that your life depended on it. But another part of me just wants to move on. "Then move on," Rebecca said gently. "You don't owe her closure. If writing back would make you feel better, do it. If not, don't." I never did write back. I filed the letter away and focused on living our lives. The summer passed peacefully. We had a few thunderstorms that knocked out power briefly, and each time, the generator kicked on automatically, keeping Rebecca's equipment running without interruption. Each time it happened, I felt a wave of relief and gratitude that we had fought for it. In August, I was invited to speak at a national HOA reform conference in Atlanta. It was surreal, standing in front of 200 people, telling our story. But as I looked out at the audience, I saw people nodding, some crying, clearly relating to what we had experienced. After my talk, at least a dozen people came up to share their own HOA horror stories. One couple had been fined for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. Another man had been threatened with foreclosure because he installed a wheelchair ramp for his mother without pre-approval. A woman told me her HOA tried to ban her service dog. "Thank you for speaking up," she said, shaking my hand. "Stories like yours give the rest of us courage to fight back." I realized then that what had happened to us, as terrible as it was at the time, had become something bigger than just our personal struggle. It had become part of a larger conversation about the balance between community standards and individual rights, between order and compassion. By October, the North Carolina legislature passed a modified version of the HOA reform bill. It wasn't perfect, but it included key protections for medical equipment and disability accommodations. Governor Roy Cooper signed it into law at a ceremony I was invited to attend. Rebecca came with me, rolling her portable oxygen tank through the state capitol building in Raleigh. "This bill wouldn't exist without people like Frank and Rebecca Rutherford," the governor said during his remarks. "They stood up not just for themselves, but for every person who needs their HOA to be understanding and humane. This law ensures that no one else will have to fight the battle they fought." After the ceremony, several state representatives approached us to thank us personally. One of them, a woman named Maria Delgado, pulled me aside. "My mother has copped," she said. "She lives in an HOA community in Charlotte. When I heard about what happened to you, I thought about her and what would happen if her HOA tried something similar. That's why I co-sponsored this bill. Thank you for making this issue visible." The drive back to Asheville from Raleigh took about 4 hours. Rebecca slept most of the way, exhausted from the long day. I drove through the mountains, thinking about how strange life was, how one terrible thing could ripple outward and ultimately lead to positive change. When we got home, there was a small package on our doorstep. Inside was a card signed by 30 of our neighbors, thanking us for standing up to Patricia and making the neighborhood a better place. There were also homemade cookies from the family 3 doors down. "We have good neighbors," Rebecca said, reading the card. "We really do." November brought cooler weather and the first real threat of winter storms. I checked the generator obsessively, making sure it was properly maintained and ready for whatever might come. The technician who serviced it assured me it was in perfect condition. "This is one of the most reliable models on the market," he said. "You've got nothing to worry about." But I still worried. I think I always would a little bit. The fear of that morning when I woke up to find it gone hadn't completely faded, and I don't know if it ever would. In December, almost exactly a year after the first power outage that had sent Rebecca to the emergency room and prompted us to buy the generator in the first place, a massive ice storm hit western North Carolina. Power went out across Asheville. Trees came down, power lines snapped, and Duke Energy warned it might take several days to restore electricity. Our generator kicked on automatically. The lights in our house flickered once and then stabilized. The oxygen concentrator continued humming. Rebecca's equipment never missed a beat. We were some of the lucky ones. Many of our neighbors were without power for 3 days. We invited several of them over to warm up, charge their phones, and have hot meals. Our house became a bit of a community center during the outage, with people coming and going, grateful for the warmth and electricity. Richard Kowalski came by on the second day with his wife and young kids. "Frank, you're a lifesaver. Our house is freezing. Stay as long as you need," I said. "We have plenty of room." His wife, Deanna, helped Rebecca in the kitchen while the kids did their homework at our dining room table. It felt good, being able to help others the way we had needed help a year ago. When the power finally came back on, Richard pulled me aside before they left. "You know, it's funny. Patricia fought so hard to get rid of this generator, and now it's the thing that helped half the neighborhood get through the storm. There's probably a lesson in there somewhere." "Yeah," I agreed. Sometimes the things that seem like inconveniences or rule violations are actually the things that save us. As winter turned to spring, life in our neighborhood continued its new normal. The HOA under Richard's leadership was functional but not oppressive. Rules were enforced when they mattered, ignored when they didn't. People felt like they could actually live in their homes without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. I occasionally wondered what Patricia was doing. I knew she had completed her house arrest and was on probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had sold her house and moved to another part of Asheville, away from our community. Part of me hoped she was doing okay, that she had learned from everything that happened. Another part of me didn't really care. One warm afternoon in April, Rebecca and I were working in our garden. She was doing much better, able to spend time outside without her oxygen as long as she didn't overexert herself. We were planting tomatoes and herbs, planning for a summer harvest. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Rebecca asked, her hands in the soil. "I try not to," I admitted. "But yeah, sometimes. If we had just given up and removed the generator like Patricia wanted, we probably would have moved. I wouldn't have felt safe here without the backup power." "Where do you think we would have gone?" she smiled. "I don't know, but I'm glad we didn't have to find out. I like it here. Despite everything, this is home." "It is," I agreed, "and we made it better by fighting for it." The generator hummed softly in the background, a constant reminder of what we had fought for and why it mattered. It wasn't just about a piece of equipment or even about Rebecca's medical needs, though those were critically important. It was about the principle that people mattered more than rules, that compassion should guide community decisions, that power should be used to help people, not to hurt them. Over the following months, I stayed involved in HOA reform efforts. I joined a national advocacy group working on model legislation for other states. I did a few more interviews and speaking engagements. It wasn't something I had ever planned to do, but it felt important, like taking something terrible that happened to us and turning it into something meaningful. Rebecca joked that I had become a professional HOA complainer. "It's your new career," she said with a laugh. "Frank Brennan, HOA whistleblower." "It doesn't pay very well," I pointed out. "No, but it's important work. I'm proud of you." By summer, our garden was flourishing. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine. The herbs were fragrant, and Rebecca spent hours out there, tending to the plants. Her health continued to improve, though she would always need the medical equipment and would always be vulnerable to respiratory problems. But she was living, really living, not just surviving. In July, we had a neighborhood block party. It was Richard's idea, a way to bring everyone together and celebrate the community we had all built. There was a bounce house for the kids, a potluck dinner, and live music from a local bluegrass band. I stood with a plate of food, watching Rebecca laugh with our neighbors, watching kids run around playing tag, watching people just enjoying being together. The generator sat in our backyard, barely visible behind some decorative shrubs we had planted to screen it from view. It hummed quietly, doing its job, keeping us safe. Quite a turnaround from last year, huh? Jennifer Walsh had come to the party to do a follow-up story on the neighborhood. "It really is," I said. "Last year this time I was convinced we were going to have to move. Now look at us." "Your story had real impact, Frank. I hope you know that." "I'm starting to realize it. I got a letter last week from a family in Oregon. They were dealing with a similar situation, and they used our case as a precedent in their fight. They won. See, you changed more than just your neighborhood. You changed how people think about these issues." The sun set over our little community, casting everything in golden light. The music played on, people laughed and talked, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Looking back on everything that happened, from that first confrontation with Patricia at my front door to the legal battles to the criminal charges to the legislative reform, I realized that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the most important ones. We didn't ask for that fight. We just wanted to live safely in our home with the medical equipment Rebecca needed. But when that basic right was threatened, we had no choice but to stand up. And in standing up, we discovered that we weren't alone. So many other people were dealing with similar problems, feeling powerless against HOA boards that had forgotten that their purpose was to serve the community, not to rule over it. Our story gave voice to those frustrations and helped create real change. As I stood there at the block party, watching my wife smile and laugh, surrounded by friends and neighbors, with the reliable hum of our generator in the background keeping her safe, I felt grateful. Grateful for the outcome, grateful for the people who helped us, grateful for Martin Green's legal expertise, grateful for Officer Rodriguez taking our case seriously, grateful for Jennifer Walsh's reporting, grateful for Richard Kowalski's integrity. Most of all, I was grateful that Rebecca was here, healthy and happy, enjoying a summer evening in the home we had fought so hard to keep. The generator continued to run day after day, night after night, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping the power on, keeping the medical equipment running, keeping my wife safe. It was just a machine, but it had become so much more than that. It was a symbol of our refusal to be bullied, our determination to protect what mattered most, and our belief that standing up for what was right was always worth the fight. And that, really, is where our story ends and our life continues, in a peaceful neighborhood in Asheville, North Carolina, with a generator humming in the backyard and hope for the future.